If it's Friday, President Trump does not rule out pardoning convicted Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell, saying he hasn't considered it, but that he's, quote, allowed to do it, as Democrats blast the private meetings between Maxwell and the deputy attorney general. Plus, President Trump says Hamas is going to be, quote, hunted down after the latest round of ceasefire and hostage negotiation talks appear to collapse at a critically desperate point in Gaza's humanitarian crisis. And ready for a rebate? President Trump floats the idea of sending checks to some Americans using the revenue from tariffs, with 1 week to go before the White House's self-imposed trade deal deadline. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. President Trump landed in Scotland just moments ago for a trip that will combine his personal business with this country's business. And while he may be hoping to leave the ongoing controversy over his administration's handling of the Epstein case behind, the president raised new questions as he spoke to reporters before leaving the White House. Mr. Trump today repeatedly praised Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, who previously served as his personal lawyer. Blanche met privately today with Epstein's longtime girlfriend and accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, for a second day in a row. The president also repeatedly dodging questions on whether he's considering a pardon or commutation for Maxwell, who's serving a 20-year prison sentence for sex trafficking.
Well, I don't know about the meeting. I know it's taking place, and he's a fantastic man. He's a great attorney. And people should really focus on how well the country's doing, or they should focus on the fact that Barack Hussein Obama led a coup.
Have you heard about Todd Blanche's interview with Ghislaine Maxwell?
Are you still disappointed in President Trump?
Well, I don't want to talk about that. What I do want to say is that Todd is a great attorney.
Would you consider a pardon or a commutation for Ghislaine Maxwell if
it's something I haven't thought about. It's really something. I'm allowed to do it, but it's something I have not thought about. I can't talk about that now because, it's a very sensitive interview going on.
Can you trust what she's telling him? She's a convicted trafficker who's eager to get out of prison.
Well, he's a professional lawyer. I think he's been through things like this before. But, you should focus on Clinton. You should focus on the president of Harvard, the former president of Harvard. You should focus on some of the hedge fund guys. I'll give you a list.
Now, just moments ago, after landing in Scotland, Mr. Trump was asked again about Maxwell, telling reporters, quote, this is no time to be talking about pardons, but again, notably not ruling out the possibility. Maxwell's attorney said today that no offer of clemency has been made. Meanwhile, congressional Democrats are sounding the alarm about Blanche's meeting with Maxwell, calling it suspicious as they try to keep Americans' attention on the Trump administration's handling of the case.
Let's not forget, Ms. Maxwell is a convicted sex trafficker and has already been charged with lying under oath. We also think, by the way, that she probably wants a pardon from Donald Trump. And so her meeting with Trump's Department of Justice cannot be trusted.
Under no circumstances should anyone from Donald Trump's Department of Justice be allowed to privately interview Ghislaine Maxwell. The conflict of interest just stares you in the face, and it's unacceptable.
Now, it all comes as the Wall Street Journal reports more notable contributors to that 2003 Epstein birthday book, which it says included a, quote, bawdy letter from Mr. Trump. Among those other names, former Democratic President Bill Clinton. A spokesperson for Clinton declined to comment on the Wall Street Journal story. NBC News has not verified the reports about that birthday book, and the president today again denied writing the note.
You maintain you did not write a letter for Jeffrey Epstein's birthday book?
I don't even know what they're talking about. Now, somebody could have written a letter and used my name, but that's happened a lot. All you have to do is take a look at the dossier, the fake dossier. Everything's fake with that administration. Everything's fake with the Democrats.
Joining me now is White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, and senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. Vaughn, let me start with you. As much as President Trump says he wants this story to go away, boy, he really gave it fresh oxygen today. What do you make of some of the comments we heard from him from the South Lawn?
And he's not ruling out clemency for Ghislaine Maxwell. I think if you're talking about oxygen, that has to be chief among them. A woman who was convicted of sex trafficking, very, very serious crimes. This is somebody who the president is openly, not completely outright rejecting, that he would potentially give a pardon or commute the sentence of. She's currently set to serve time till she's about 80 years old. And we still do not have specifics about what the day and a half worth of interview, exactly what the purpose of that interview between his deputy attorney general and Ghislaine Maxwell in the Tallahassee courthouse is ultimately going to lead to, whether they will seek to try to bring new charges. But we know from the attorney for Ghislaine Maxwell leaving the courthouse here today, suggesting that she did not invoke any privileges, that she answered every single one of the deputy attorney general's questions, and that there was a whole range of issues discussed here. So for the president, he is not outright ignoring it, instead openly not denying outright that he would potentially provide clemency for Ghislaine Maxwell.
Well, Vaughn, and you've been covering this story for quite some time. As you know, there are plenty of conspiracy theories swirling around the Epstein matter. For those who believe in those conspiracy theories, does having the president's former personal attorney, who is now the deputy attorney general, run the risk of only adding to that air, to compounding those conspiracy theories?
Right. These are the same allies and base of supporters that have long defended the president through his criminal indictments, the hush money payment trial, of which Donald Trump was found guilty. But the lead defense attorney was, in fact, Todd Blanche, the man that was conducting this interview here today. And in so many ways, I think for the first time in the last decade of Donald Trump's political relevance, you see skepticism not only among voters. Polling had suggested that 50% of Republicans were not satisfied with this White House's handling of the Epstein files, but also Republican lawmakers, including James Comer, the chair of the House Oversight Committee, who has said that a pardon or a commutation would be unacceptable under any circumstances for Ghislaine Maxwell, and that they want the records themselves of the Epstein files, and that effectively going down and having that interview conversation with Ghislaine Maxwell isn't good enough for House Republicans, and that they want to see the files themselves. There is pressure that it has been very clearly made will not relent until more answers are provided, some of which the White House has been hesitant to give to this point.
And Vaughn, let's shift to the president's trip to Scotland. Of course, he's just landed. What are the key goals of this trip? What are you going to be watching for?
Right. The president first is going to be heading to two of his golf courses. One of these is a new 18-hole golf course that is going to be open, that he is going to be there for the ribbon cutting for. But there is also a business component of this. The White House has made clear. Just earlier today, the head of the EU suggested that she will be meeting personally with the president on Sunday at a time in which the president continues to hold out in striking a trade agreement with the European Union. Upon arriving here to Scotland just moments ago, he suggested that it is a 50-50 chance that he strikes a deal with the EU before new additional tariffs are set to go into effect on August 1st. But the president is also going to be meeting with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer on Monday. This is a 4-day trip here to Scotland, quite a time for the president to leave the mainland United States, but also a very important time overseas as his White House attempts to strike these trade deals that have been sort of far-reaching and far from being able to wholly be ultimately signed off on here over the last months.
Yeah, an immense amount of urgency given that self-imposed one-week deadline. Vaughn, thank you so much for your great reporting.
Thanks,
Let me turn now to Tom Winter. So, Tom, President Trump kind of danced around the possibility of a commutation or pardon. Of course, he didn't rule one out. Beyond those options, though, what could happen next?
Well, there could be what's called a Rule 35 that could be filed, Kristen, and that's a situation where it's actually going to be federal prosecutors who've got to come before the court and say, Your Honor, in the year after she was sentenced, so that would bring this into 2023, from that point on, she has developed new information that is helpful to the U.S. government in some way, shape, or form, and then make an argument before the court that her sentence should be reduced. It can't be information that she knew going back to the mid-2000s or leading up to her trial because that information should have been disclosed already. That's the way the rules work. There is a slight caveat if she knew something, say, back in 2005 that she didn't think would at all be relevant, and it is today, then that's something that she could bring forth. So that's the way to do this through the courts. Door number two, if you will, is the one that you just referenced, the idea of a commutation, which would be a reduction or an elimination of her prison sentence or an outright pardon, which would clear the conviction as well. So those are kind of the two paths here going forward. The third, of course, is that she stays in jail. They had a good discussion, and that's the end of it. So we'll just have to see what comes up in the coming days and weeks as it pertains to her case.
Undoubtedly, I know you'll be watching it very closely. Now, as we mentioned, Todd Blanche was Mr. Trump's personal attorney. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying it's a conflict of interest for him to conduct these interviews. Tom, what does the law say?
Yeah, I mean, the law here, we're really in uncharted territory, Kristen. I can't think over the entire course of my career where a deputy attorney general has specifically conducted an interview as some sort of an investigation, even though just a couple of weeks ago in that memo they said that it was closed. So it's not clear to me exactly what the legal role of Todd Blanche is here. And if there wasn't anybody in the room, another agent, another prosecutor, it adds even more complication to the issue because he would then be the sole witness. So then who moves the court if they're going to go that way in order to make the argument that Maxwell should have her sentence reduced? It's so unusual. A deputy attorney general might get an email, might get a quick phone call on the highest of priority cases, and this is certainly high priority, about what was going on in the investigation. To actively take a part in it is something that is highly unusual. And so I think a lot of people have questions. Certainly the victim's attorneys who have interviewed her on a number of occasions, including where she lied, according to prosecutors, they have questions about this arrangement, too.
So you take me to my next question. Have we heard anything from the victims?
Yeah, the victims are starting to speak out on our sister properties on NBC News Now, talking about the idea that they have been completely heard of. Again, I mean, that's the whole reason why we got to this point, is that the victims were really upset about the non-prosecution agreement and the fact that they were never consulted. That led to a court action. Court documents started coming out, and that's how this Epstein case over the years, that's why I have so much documentation on it, but that's how this Epstein case over the years really started to gather a lot of attention and snowball because there were more filings and more questions that were raised, more information that came out as to how this non-prosecution agreement came to be in the first place. The victims complained they weren't heard then. That's their exact complaint now. And you talk to any victims expert, Kristen, they will tell you that victims being left out of the loop is something that really haunts them and really hurts them. And already, one of the witnesses in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial several years back died by suicide. So this is really raising a lot of questions, not only for their attorneys, but for these women themselves.
Absolutely. Tom Winter, great reporting today and all week long. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Sahil, let me turn to you now. Democrats, of course, have taken up this Epstein issue as well. It seems like, of course, they're using it as a hammer against President Trump. Are they planning to bring this to their constituents over the recess? What are you going to be watching for in that regard?
Yeah, it's a number of different things, Kristen. Democrats see this as a special opportunity to crack the MAGA coalition, not just to depress Trump's base, which they do see as one opportunity, but to also peel away some Trump voters, some Trump supporters in 2024 who are not exactly diehard MAGA figures, but kind of anti-establishment, anti-government, anti-corruption, and saw Trump as a vehicle to advance some of their goals. They see this as an opportunity to weaken Trump with certain characteristics, certain issues where he's strong with his base on, including perceptions of honesty, transparency, willingness to fight the system, fight corruption. And Democrats are really escalating this on their way out to recess. They're calling this the Epstein recess, noting that House Republican leaders recessed early in order to avoid votes on this issue. I've obtained a memo by House Democratic leaders encouraging members to raise the alarm on the Epstein files, calling it a top messaging priority, and even offering some guidance as to how they can do that. I've also heard from some Democrats who are a little bit shocked at the power of this issue, Kristen. They thought this was going to be a bit of a nothing burger, maybe a one-day or two-day issue, and just bounce off Donald Trump like most things do, with Teflon Don. But that has not happened here. This issue has staying power, and Democrats are very, very eager to capitalize on it and continue to capitalize on it, especially as they see Trump really struggling to try to change the topic to other issues.
And yet, Sahil, I think one of the big unanswered questions that loom so large is how will this play electorally? Because, of course, after the 2024 elections, one of the lessons for Democrats was we need to stay laser focused on the economy, on pocketbook issues. How much is there concern right now within the Democratic Party that this could overshadow that pocketbook message?
I think they've come around to the view, Kristen, that they can do both. You know, that's why some Democrats initially, when this first broke, you heard multiple of them saying, no, the Epstein issue is just a distraction from the fact that, you know, the president doesn't want to talk about the big, beautiful bill, that doesn't want to talk about the rescissions package. It turns out you can talk about Epstein on one hand, but also, you know, talk about the big, beautiful bill, the Medicaid cuts and the various things that Democrats want to highlight at the same time. You don't necessarily have to choose because of the staying power, because of the escape velocity that the Epstein issue has. So I mean, I think it's been a bit of a journey for Democrats to finally discover an issue where Trump is not able to control his base, where he has completely lost control of House Republican leaders, and you know, in the way they operate, and they are eager to milk this for as long as they can.
Yeah, it's the first time that we've seen these types of divisions within the Republican Party, particularly in the second Trump administration and among the MAGA base. Sahil, as always, thank you for your fantastic reporting. We really appreciate it. Coming up, Gaza on edge. Talks to reach a ceasefire, hostage and humanitarian aid deal appear to break down, raising fears that violence could soon escalate in Gaza, where a deadly hunger crisis is taking hold. We have the very latest from the region. Plus, President Trump appears to take a softer tone on Fed Chair Jerome Powell after the two shared a tense moment yesterday live on TV while touring the Fed's renovation project. We'll take a look at that. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Despite the growing international calls for a ceasefire and an end to the Israel-Hamas war, diplomatic efforts appear to be on hold. Yesterday, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff announcing he was cutting short ceasefire talks in Doha because negotiations for Hamas were not acting in good faith. Earlier today, President Trump reacted to the collapse of those talks and seemed to indicate the fighting could now escalate.
They pulled out of Gaza. They pulled out in terms of negotiating. It was too bad. Hamas didn't really want to make a deal. I think they want to die, and it's very, very bad. Are you done with it got to be to a point where you're going to have to finish the job. I think what's going to happen is they're going to be hunted down.
Now, this all comes against the backdrop of the worsening food crisis in the Gaza Strip and growing international pressure to distribute more aid into the war-torn enclave. NBC News International correspondent Matt Bradley has more on this devastating situation.
Well, we're hearing a chorus of concern from around the world for the worsening humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. We're hearing, according to the United Nations survey, that around 9% of children in the Gaza Strip are suffering from severe malnutrition. This up from 6% in May. So we really are seeing a worsening situation, and one that the world is struggling to try to deal with. The United Nations is trying to get in aid. They are faulting the Israelis, they say, for creating difficulties in distributing the aid inside the Gaza Strip. I actually went to the Gaza Strip with the Israeli military yesterday, and they showed me all of the aid that's actually in Gaza that hasn't been distributed. The Israelis are faulting all of these aid agencies and the United Nations for not picking it up and distributing it throughout the Gaza Strip. So this is a worsening situation, and it's one that's especially afflicting children, but it doesn't look as though there's going to be any relief anytime soon. Steve Witkoff, the president's special envoy to the Middle East, he actually just left some of these negotiations for a ceasefire. He said that it doesn't look as though there's any appetite from Hamas for some sort of negotiated deal. And it sounds as though he is giving up on these negotiations, at least from his statement saying that he's going to have to find other ways of releasing those hostages. Now, in the meantime, France's President Emmanuel Macron has said that France will recognize the state of Palestine by this fall, sometime in September. That would make him not the first country. There are hundreds of countries who recognize Palestine. But it would make him the largest and most significant Western country to do so. Now, of course, we've already heard from Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, dismissing this. We heard from President Donald Trump saying that this statement carries no weight. But this could cause other countries to do the same.
Matt Bradley, thank you so much for that. Joining me now on set is NBC News Chief Washington Correspondent and Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, thank you so much for being here. What a devastating situation that is unfolding. President Trump saying in the wake of these diplomatic talks collapsing, we could see the fighting increase. You have Emmanuel Macron saying that France is now prepared to recognize the Palestinian state. Talk about these two developments.
Well, all of these developments are incredibly troubling. First of all, President Trump certainly seemed to be indicating when he said we're going to have to hunt them down, some sort of military action, kinetic action, instead of the ceasefire that had long been hoped for, as, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu was just here the week before last, or 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about a ceasefire. Then he said, well, it wouldn't be within days, but we hoped very soon. But all those hopes have really now faltered, to say the least. There's some hope that these talks have not really collapsed, that this is a pause, a break. Witkoff is choosing to pull back rather than staying, as some of the previous negotiators had done, and just sort of stick it out and trudge it out the way, trudge through it as Brett McGurk did for weeks and weeks on end. He obviously has a lot of other things on his plate. So that's his strategy, to put more pressure on Hamas, perhaps. But the problem with Hamas is that their top officials, it's not a problem, it's a success by Israel in terms of targeted assassinations, but they've eliminated the leadership with whom they were negotiating, both the political and military leadership. So there's almost no one now who can speak for Hamas. And you've got a lot of lone actors and all of those miles and miles of tunnels, and a lot of danger for the remaining people, Palestinian, and, of course, the hostages in Gaza.
And, of course, Andrea, the question looming over all of this is what to do about the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding there. You've been pressing State Department officials. We've seen you there in the briefing room trying to get answers to this. But the pressure that's mounting, not only on Israel, but on the United States as well, to try to get food to the people who are suffering and, quite frankly, starving to death in the Gaza Strip.
Well, I mean, the Macron decision to recognize the Palestinian state, despite the fact that Mahmoud Abbas, their leader, the Palestinian Authority leader, is derided in both the Arab world and in most of the Western world for not reforming and not bringing younger and more moderate and more, frankly, less corrupt officials into the fold, which would permit and encourage the Gulf leaders, the Arab states, to come in and help take over. Despite all of that, what Israel's blockade has done is really alienate almost everyone in the Western world except for the United States. So the U.S. and Israel have jointly created this foundation. It was done with a Boston Consulting Group, which has now walked away from it, abandoned it, criticized it, because it says, as does the UN and all of these Western leaders, 28 nations, including our closest allies, as well as 100 aid groups, saying that they are violating international law and established aid formulas for delivering aid throughout Gaza, not just in the south, where Israel would like the population to move, forcing people to travel from north to south to get their feedings, and only doing it in 4 sites, 4 sites that are guarded and monitored by the IDF. Those are not the way. That is not the way aid is supposed to be distributed. That's not the way the World Health Organization did. There were 400 sites in the past. And so this is really just a trickle of aid. Jordan did get 35 truckloads of flour in yesterday, under great difficulty. But there are raids, there are riots, food riots, because people are starving, and the children are dying, and they don't have fuel for the hospitals. They are putting infants, piling them into a single incubator. They don't have enough energy. It is a disaster.
The images are just unbearable. Andrea Mitchell, thank you for bringing your reporting to us today and throughout this week. We really appreciate it. Coming up next, the price you pay inside the push on Capitol Hill to ban companies from using AI to charge different people different prices for the same products. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. With just 1 week to go before the White House's latest self-imposed deadline to complete all of the trade deals and agreements with some of the United States' largest trading partners, many are still unfinished, including EU trade officials announcing today they'll hold talks with the president in Scotland on Sunday. The president this morning telling reporters he puts the odds at 50-50 of reaching a deal with the EU, with even longer odds of reaching an agreement with Canada by next week. Take a look.
Well, most of the deals are finished right now. They're finished because we're just going to charge a certain tariff. A lower tariff that I could get. I don't want to hurt country. But we're going to send a letter out sometime during the week. So August 1st is going to come, and we will have most of our deals finished, if not all.
The Treasury Secretary saying the federal government has collected more than $1 billion in tariff revenue so far this year, and the president is now suggesting some of that money could be distributed to Americans.
We're thinking about that, actually. We have so much money coming in. We're thinking about a little rebate, but the big thing we want to do is pay down debt. But we're thinking about a rebate. That's a very good question. We just made a lot of news. We're thinking about a rebate because we have so much money coming in from tariffs that a little rebate for people of a certain income level might be very nice.
NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung joins me now. So, okay, a lot of people perked up when they heard President Trump hit at a rebate because of how much money he says the U.S. is making off of tariffs. What do you know about this, Brian? Is this realistic? How might it work?
Yeah, it's bringing back these memories of the stimulus checks during the pandemic, which a lot of people were excited about. I want to point out that we are so many legislative steps away from this actually happening, but the president's suggesting that they could use the money from these tariff collections to get rebates out to Americans would be part of the story of the president trying to tout benefits of these tariffs. Although I want to point out there's been a number of literature that have pointed to a lot of these tariff payments coming from American companies, not from overseas. So this would essentially be money just flowing back into other places. But I want to point out that there were talks earlier this year about a Doge dividend, kind of in the similar vein, where any sort of savings that came from Doge cuts could be rebated to Americans in the form of payments. Again, that didn't really seem to go anywhere, although the administration did suggest that they were looking into it. So could this be the same situation where there's chatter about it and then nothing ultimately happens? That does remain to be seen, Chris.
Let me ask you about the tariffs. Of course, they've been delayed for months now. The administration has that self-imposed August 1st deadline, which is a week from today. How are investors, how are CEOs looking at this? Is there a sense they could actually take effect a week from today?
Yeah, honestly, Kristen, it seems like markets as of late have just been shrugging off the recent tariff headlines. This week, we got a number of announcements from the president, including positive developments, of course, on the European Union front, which we're keeping all eyes on Scotland today. But even just this week, we did get the inking of the Japan deal. There were also a number of other countries like the Philippines that were in focus as well. So again, the points here are pointing to the positive side in terms of developing these deals, but markets haven't really done that much. We have hit all-time highs on a number of different indexes, and I think that it's basically shrugging off the concern that these high tariff rates could come into effect for a number of countries that aren't able to ink deals with the United States by August 1st, which is, as you point out, next week. If that does come to pass, and that actually is a hard deadline and these tariff rates go into effect, could that send markets into a tailspin that could bring back the days of the first week of April with Liberation Day, where we saw a massive slip in stock markets? That does remain to be seen.
Yeah, I think a lot of people remember that day very well. Let's talk now about President Trump's really extraordinary visit to the Fed yesterday. He was visiting the construction project, complaining about the fact that it's over budget. In part, of course, that's because of inflation. Brian, you had that extraordinary moment with the Fed chair fact-checking him on the price of how much those renovations are actually costing. But let me ask you about one of the big takeaways there, which is that the president said he got the impression from Fed Chair Jerome Powell that he may be ready to cut interest rates. What is the big takeaway from your perspective? Is that accurate? Is that how you read it?
Yeah, the president left for Scotland this morning, and before taking off made those remarks that you just mentioned, where he suggested that the Fed chair told him that maybe interest rates could be lower. If you kind of look back at the tape, the way that the president worded it was kind of interesting. He said that the Fed chair had told him that the economy was looking good, and that the president read that the suggestion from those comments were that he could cut interest rates later on. So it's a little bit of him putting words into the Fed chair's mouth, which, of course, is not unusual given what we've seen from his Truth Social post. But I want to point out a Fed meeting is coming next Wednesday, and the expectation is for them not to lower interest rates then.
Yeah, well, we're going to be watching it. I know you're going to be watching it very closely.
Yeah.
Brian Chung, thank you so much for joining us, as always. We want to turn now to the business of artificial intelligence and a new push from Congress to protect consumers. For years, companies have collected your data to determine how to market you. Now there are signs companies are using that same information not just to entice you to buy, but also to determine how much you pay. And one member of Congress thinks that should be illegal. NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins me with more. So, Ryan, how does surveillance pricing work, and what can Congress actually do to stop it?
Yeah, Kristen, it's not clear just how much companies are using this technology, but we know that it exists. I'll give you an example. You are searching the internet because you are desperate, you've lost a loved one, you need to rush to the funeral and are looking for an emergency trip. They could glean from your search history just how desperate you are to make this purchase and then jack up the price of your plane ticket just for you. One member of Congress thinks this is not a good idea and it should be against the law.
Every day, millions of Americans are combing the internet in search of information. But the collection of that data is a two-way street, with companies gobbling up your search history and using it to sell you products.
You know your data is being collected. Everybody can sense that all of the time. But what people need to know is now how it's being used.
But as technology evolves, so do the tactics that companies are using to take advantage of your personal information, even setting different prices for different people. It's called surveillance pricing, and Texas Congressman Greg Casar wants to ban it.
It can be used to find out how badly you need a product yourself. And we should have prices set fairly, not being set by finding out what is the most you as a person are willing to pay.
Some companies are already touting the role artificial intelligence is playing in setting prices. Delta Airlines told investors their pilot program to tailor pricing based on an AI analysis was successful. They've set a goal to have a fifth of all of their fares set by AI by the end of the year. Delta says that their AI program is not designed to target pricing based on a consumer's personal information, and that the company, quote, always complies with regulations around pricing and disclosures. In January, the Federal Trade Commission released an initial report that showed a person's precise location or browser history can be frequently used to target individual consumers with different prices for the same goods and services. It's part of why Casar believes it's time for Congress to intervene.
If we don't intervene now and ban these sorts of price gouging and wage suppression right now, then I think it's just going to spread all over the economy.
Casar has introduced the Stop AI Pricing and Wage Gouging Act of 2025 with the goal of banning the practice and forcing companies to set prices based on the market, not an analysis of your internet browsing history.
How do you get ahead of it? This is a silent killer. It's already starting to happen in our economy, and it is spreading. So it's time for there to finally be a proposal in Congress, and that's why I'm releasing this as its first bill of its kind, for us to just outright ban the practice of price gouging by using your private data through AI.
And it's not just what you buy that has Casar concerned. It's what you earn, especially in the gig economy. He believes companies like rideshare and grocery and food delivery services could take advantage of their employees.
A gig app should not be able to know that you recently went to a pawn shop and have hit hard times, and then they say, oh, well, you can take a lower wage then because you're so desperate for work.
So Casar knows this is a problem, but he also knows that it will be difficult to get this passed. He's a member of the minority party, so this may not get to the floor anytime soon. And Kristen, keep in mind, and this is an ongoing problem in Washington, the technology may evolve faster than Congress can react to change the law to ban this practice. So this is something he's trying to get on the radar to get people's attention so they can move quickly before it's too late. Kristen.
Wow. Well, just really extraordinary. Ryan, thank you for bringing us that report. We really appreciate it. Coming up after the break, one of the most competitive Senate races of the 2026 midterm elections takes shape in battleground North Carolina. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We are watching some major midterm developments on who's running and who's not running and a couple of key battlegrounds. First, let's talk about Wisconsin. Democratic Governor Tony Evers says he will not run for a third term next year, setting off a scramble for candidates on both sides. And in North Carolina, a source tells NBC News that RNC Chairman Michael Whatley intends to run for the Senate seat being vacated by Republican Senator Thom Tillis. President Trump posted an endorsement of Whatley on Truth Social last night. It comes as President Trump's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, announced yesterday she will not make a bid of her own. And on the Democratic side of the race, we expect clarity in the next couple of days, with multiple outlets reporting former Governor Roy Cooper could announce he's running as soon as Monday. Joining me now on set is Dan Merrick, a co-anchor of the Washington Post Early Brief newsletter, Amisha Cross, Democratic strategist and former campaign advisor to President Barack Obama, and Republican strategist Rick Tyler. Thanks to all of you for being here. Let's talk about North Carolina. It's always one of the states that we watch closest. Dan, here we have this potential matchup between Whatley, Cooper. What do you make of it and the kind of purple nature of North Carolina?
It's going to get expensive. It's North Carolina. I mean, that's the thing that will unite Wisconsin governor and North Carolina Senate, is they're both going to be quite expensive races. I think Roy Cooper is somebody who has clearly won statewide. Democrats are incredibly excited about the idea of him running for Senate. Whatley also has incredible relationships in the state. I mean, he ran the North Carolina GOP for a number of years. I think he's pretty well liked in the state. And I think Republicans are excited about the early poll numbers that they're seeing about him versus Cooper versus what it would have been against Tillis versus Cooper. You already see that Republicans are trying to define Cooper before he is even in the race, which cuts both ways. Obviously, it allows, they want to define him and they're able to do that, but it also hints at the fact that he's a pretty powerful, potent opponent. And they know that they have to get out in front of a possible campaign.
Yeah, I mean, Rick, let's talk about Whatley. In order to win a state like North Carolina, you do need independents to win. Do you think the former RNC chair is someone who can win the coalition that is necessary to win a Senate race in North Carolina?
I do, only because Whatley has deep roots there. As you say, he was the chairman, and he's developed those roots for a long time. I think the candidates are actually pretty evenly matched. I don't think the year is evenly matched. Trump is suffering with independence. I assume that's nationwide. I know that's nationwide. I assume that's also carries in North Carolina. I think the president's daughter may have considered running for Senate has the president's poll numbers been better, but they are really almost as bad as they were when he left the office the last time.
Yeah, let's talk about independence for just a minute, because we do have a new poll. It's a Gallup poll out today. It shows President Trump's approval rating at 37%. But the independent voters, look at this. It's at 29%, down 18 points, Rick, since January. I mean, you talk about his challenges with independence. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, he's down in a lot of different subject areas, too. He's down in foreign policy. He's down in his trade policy. He's down in budget deficit or the handling of the budget. And he's down in Ukraine, which is really very interesting. So he's still very popular among Republicans, and he's been successful there. He's still got 89% of Republicans. He doesn't need Democrats, but he does need independents, and his party needs independents.
Yeah, that's the key. I mean, his numbers are his numbers, but you are exactly right, is that independents don't support Trump. They're less likely to support Republicans down ballot. And you ask a lot of Republicans across the country, the thing that matters to them the most is the president's popularity as these candidates are running.
Trump supporters are actually less likely to support Republicans down ballot.
Amisha, jump in here, because, of course, Democrats are looking at the possibility of a Roy Cooper run for Senate in North Carolina. We've seen popular governors run for Senate before. It doesn't always go so well. How enthused would Democrats be about a Cooper campaign, and particularly against the backdrop of these numbers that we're discussing?
Well, I think that they are very excited about Cooper and are betting heavily on North Carolina.
They always saw North Carolina as a place to pick up, always saw it as a place that had a very strong leaning that they could grab when it comes to turning blue in that arena. But on that same token, they are being very strategic about how these independent numbers play out, because one of the reasons Trump got independence was largely based on kitchen table issues, on a belief that affordability was going to be around the corner. Now we're seeing him pull back monies for things like disaster relief. We're seeing what just happened with the pushback against what we know will happen in the next couple of years with rural hospitals closing. We've seen time and time again the dismantling of the Department of Ed, in addition to civil rights and justice and equity falling apart as well. The president has gone way too hard into the MAGA, ultra-right, alt-right view and turned that into policy. And that was always going to be a push-off to independent voters. It was never something they fully supported.
So, Rick, could that hurt him in North Carolina? Could that hurt a Whatley in North Carolina, for example? Look,
Off-year elections when the president is not on the ballot is historically bad for the president's party. And I don't know that the policy objectives have been so overwhelming with independents. Again, Republicans like what he's doing. Some don't like the way he's doing it, but independents seem to not like that at all, because 37% is not very high. Yeah. And he has the worst, President Trump right now has the worst polling record of any president in his second term, including first and second terms of presidents going back to Kennedy.
They also think he prioritized the wrong things. We're watching the overzealous outreach when it comes to his use of ICE. They're also watching him, a president who said that he was going to end the war in Gaza on day one, that he was going to make sure that, this Russian incursion, it stopped. What we have seen is the exact opposite.
Well, and we're also watching this drama play out, Dan, over the Epstein controversy. It's really one of the first controversies the president hasn't been able to shake, hasn't been able to turn the channel on. And it's dividing Republicans, quite frankly, in a way that we have not seen. Our first barometer will be when lawmakers go home to their town halls, hear from their constituents. But how much staying power do you think this could have?
I mean, Democrats certainly hope it stays around. They want to talk about it. It's actually what's interesting about these polls is he's getting pressure from both sides. He's getting pressure from independents. And the base is clearly not happy with what he's doing here. Now, will they flee him in a poll, or will that show up in polling numbers? It's probably less likely, maybe not. But Democrats want to talk about this. They want to keep this in the news. It's this weird situation where there's strange bedfellows on Capitol Hill with kind of further right Republicans and Democrats who want to talk about Epstein. I do have a hard time believing that, people who are going to town halls in swing states or in key districts are going to go and really want to talk about Epstein. They probably want to talk about pocketbook issues. Now, you can make the case that someone who goes to a town hall isn't like a normal everyday voter, but still, I mean, you are right. Voters care a lot more about pocketbook issues. But on Capitol Hill, there's this weird situation where you have Republicans and Democrats who want to keep this in the news.
Amisha, that seemed to be one of the big lessons from 2024. Yeah. Like, stay laser focused on pocketbook issues. You and I have discussed this repeatedly. Are you concerned, are some Democrats concerned that by focusing on Epstein, that takes Democrats off course of what voters care about most?
Well, I think that Democrats are making the concerted effort, one, to do the thing that grabs media's attention because they've thrown 5,000 other things and it didn't work. But I also think they can walk and chew gum at the same time. They are visiting districts. They are having conversations and using a 50-state strategy, making sure that they are putting affordability at the top of that conversation, be it whether prices going up at the grocery store, energy, you name it. They're having those conversations because they matter and because they know that that is the number one thing on voters' minds.
Rick, final thought to you. How much concern is there inside Republican circles that Epstein could be one more data point that could cost Republicans the House? And
I'm not a reporter and I don't play on one on TV. The last time I characterized a story like this is when, after Biden's debate, and said this will not go away. There's too much to chew on here. This is a story. It will not go away. It is going to go on and on and on until the Trumpstein files, or whatever you want to call them, are released. And it just has too many elements, too many unanswered questions to leave it alone. And so it's got to go. And Trump keeps saying, "Why are you asking about Epstein?" It was a little like the Pope saying, "Why do you keep asking about McCarrick?" It's just
right. Yeah. No, it's a really good point. You were right about the debate, turns out. Thank you all so much, Dan, Amisha, and Rick, for a great conversation. Still to come, President Zelensky responds to the first anti-government protests in his country since Russia's invasion and allegations he's dismantling anti-corruption agencies. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. For the first time since the start of the war in Ukraine, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets this week to protest their own government and a controversial law signed by President Zelensky to curb the independence of the country's anti-corruption agencies. These were the scenes. Take a look in cities all across Ukraine under martial law because of the ongoing war with Russia, with protesters holding signs opposing the new law. In response, President Zelensky says he's now approved a draft bill to restore the independence of anti-corruption agencies. Now, this is all happening as Russian and Ukrainian officials met again in Istanbul for the latest round of negotiations aimed at ending the war. Joining me now is Andrew Denary, Associate Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being here. Really appreciate it. So talk about the level of surprise that you're seeing these protests all across the country in Ukraine in the midst of this war.
Thanks very much for having me. And I think maybe for our viewers, it's helpful to give a very quick timeline of how things have unfolded this week. So on Monday, we had the most shocking part were these raids of anti-corruption agencies in Ukraine by law enforcement. And then on Tuesday, we saw President Zelensky send this very controversial bill to Parliament, this draft law that would have put two independent anti-corruption agencies under the Office of the Prosecutor General, which of course is under President Zelensky. And Ukrainians got quite upset about this and understood this as an anti-democratic measure that would have given President Zelensky more control over these agencies that are meant to independently investigate government corruption. And so on Wednesday, we saw the widespread protests you talk about across Ukraine, not only in Kyiv, the capital. And then on Thursday, President Zelensky very quickly turned around and said, wait, I have a new bill. It's going to restore things to as they were, on Sunday or Monday morning. And that bill is actually waiting to be taken to the floor in Parliament probably toward the end of next week.
What has the reaction been to this new bill? Does it go far enough? Does it satisfy the concerns of all of those protesters?
This is a really good question, and the devil really is in the details here. So I've looked at the bill. It does restore the independence of these two agencies, which is the positive. But it's really interesting. The reasoning that President Zelensky used for doing this law that would have put both agencies under his control in the first place was that there was too much Russian involvement in these agencies, that they'd been infiltrated. And so the really interesting bits that are in this new law are things like polygraph tests every 6 months for detectives to kind of supposedly root out this sort of thing. So I think we're in a better place than we were certainly on Monday or on Tuesday. But the bill really does need to get passed next week because Ukraine has its own legislative session that's about to go out.
What is so remarkable is that here you have these protests against the backdrop of a war that is escalating. Russia has launched some of its most serious, devastating attacks in recent days and recent weeks. Is there a concern that the mere optics of Ukraine being fractured in this way could in some way impact Ukraine's ability to defend itself?
Well, so I was talking to I take Ukrainian lessons online, and I was talking to my teacher about this just this week. And she was saying, the Russians are still enemy number one. We get that. But this bill is enemy number two.
Wow.
And so that really shows you exactly how strongly Ukrainians felt about this, but also that they haven't taken the eye off of who the real enemy is here. And I actually think it's a credit to President Zelensky that he was able to so nimbly turn this around after conversations, not only with human rights and civil society activists in his own country, but with heads of state, Germany, the UK, folks from the European Union, that were saying this bill threatens your European future. And so I actually think it's a really exemplary case of how a democracy should work. Because, for a government to essentially turn around and reverse course just days after introducing a new law, that's a really interesting example of how democracy works, and certainly not something that would happen in Russia.
Absolutely. And let's talk about the state of these talks. There were a new round of talks in Turkey this week. What is the latest, the status of these talks? Are they getting anywhere, Andrew?
Well, so this round of negotiations we're calling it the negotiations that could have been an email. I mean,
wow. Yeah.
So both sides flew from Kyiv, flew from Moscow to Istanbul, showed up for 40 minutes. They essentially agreed to exchange prisoners, which is significant, certainly. 1,200 POWs are agreed to be exchanged. but they're so far apart just on what conditions they would want for a peace deal. Russia, of course, wants to control all of Ukraine, and Ukraine wants an immediate ceasefire, which, by the way, is something that President Trump has endorsed. And so there's still quite a bit of daylight between these two sides.
And just very quickly, the anticipation that the U.S. could impose sanctions?
Well, we'll have until about Labor Day when Trump's 50-day moratorium threat of secondary sanctions comes in, and we'll have to see.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Great information. We will be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News stations. I'll have interviews with Congressman Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, plus exclusively House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senator Lindsey Graham. The news continues with Tom Costello in for Hallie Jackson right now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.